Rain poured down relentlessly on the empty streets of New York, each heavy drop striking the soaked pavement, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. The wind howled through the towering skyscrapers, composing a chilling symphony in the stormy night. Amid this fierce silence, a lone figure walked slowly through the city that never sleeps. Donald Trump pulled his long coat tighter around him, his sharp eyes scanning the streets. He could have stayed inside his luxurious car, gliding past the world with detached indifference like so many others. But tonight, something felt different. A strange pull, as if something or someone was waiting for him in the rain. His heavy footsteps carried him farther, blending into the city's restless rhythm. But then, in the midst of the dark, something caught his eye. Under the flickering streetlight, a man sat against a damp wall, his body trembling in the biting wind. His tattered military uniform was worn thin, stained by time and hardship. A battered backpack lay beside him, soaked through by the relentless rain. In his frail hands, he clutched a small notebook, its pages blurred and ruined by the water. Yet faint traces of a forgotten story still remained. Trump stopped. He stared at the man, not with the gaze of a politician, but with the eyes of a fellow human being. There was something about him, a quiet resilience, a past weighed down by unseen burdens. The man looked up. His eyes, despite being drenched in rain, held a piercing sharpness, as if they had seen things most people could never comprehend. Trump knelt down, his voice steady, yet warm. "What's your name?" The man let out a faint chuckle, one that carried no joy, only bitterness and exhaustion. His voice was hoarse as he replied, "I used to have a name, but no one remembers it anymore. Not just another homeless man, not someone broken beyond repair. There was something more to him, a story that had never been told." And in that moment, Trump knew he had to be the one to listen. If you believe that a story can change a life, if you believe that even the smallest act can lead to something extraordinary, join us. This is not just a story. It's a shocking truth about courage, betrayal, and a soldier forgotten in the shadows. Subscribe to Golden Story, hit the like button, share, and leave a comment. Because sometimes a single moment, a single word, can change a person's fate. And tonight, Donald Trump might change a life, or maybe an entire nation. Follow the story now. Part 1. A stormy night and a fateful encounter. Rain poured over New York City as if the sky itself was unleashing its fury upon the world. Droplets pounded against the glass windows of towering skyscrapers, streaming down onto the sidewalks where streetlights cast hazy, flickering reflections. The wind howled through the empty streets, whipping through the narrow alleys with eerie, ghostly wails. Most people had long sought shelter, avoiding the wrath of the storm. Yet amidst the chaos, one lone figure continued to walk. Donald Trump pulled his long coat tighter around him, lowering his head slightly against the fierce gusts slashing across his face. After an intense meeting, he could have been sitting inside his warm limousine, gliding through the streets without ever feeling the bone-chilling cold of the rainy night. But tonight, something unsettled him. It was a strange feeling, an unexplainable pull urging him to step out of his comfort zone. It wasn't about business, unfinished projects, or political strategy. It was something deeper, a peculiar emptiness, as if a missing piece of the puzzle had yet to be found. He had walked these streets hundreds of times before, yet tonight they felt unfamiliar. His footsteps echoed against the rain-soaked pavement, merging with the rhythmic patter of the downpour. Everything around him seemed to slow, as if time itself was making way for something important to unfold. The bright glass facades of the office buildings reflected his image, alone and contemplative in the heart of this grand, opulent city. In the distance, a car horn blared, only to be swallowed by the night. Trump kept walking, with no specific destination in mind, simply letting his steps guide him. It was unlike him, a man of precise plans, someone who always knew exactly what he wanted and how to get it. But tonight was different. A sharp gust of wind cut through the streets, biting into his skin like icy daggers. He shuddered slightly, adjusting his collar. and came to a stop at a quiet street corner. Before him, a narrow alley stretched into darkness, hidden between two towering buildings. No one would willingly walk into an alley during a storm, and yet something deep inside told him he should. He narrowed his eyes, peering into the shadows ahead. Then, in the dim glow of the streetlights and the shimmering rain bouncing off the pavement, he saw something, or someone. A figure, slumped against the crumbling brick wall, drenched by the relentless downpour. His heart pounded. He didn't know why, but he felt. No, he knew. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't. Another gust of wind rushed past, carrying a faint, pained sound that blended with the rain. Trump inhaled deeply, clenched his fist inside his coat pocket, and slowly took a step forward. Tonight, he wasn't sure what he was looking for, but maybe fate had already decided what he was meant to find. Part 2. The encounter with the mysterious soldier. Trump stepped forward slowly, his footsteps echoing against the rain-soaked pavement in the deserted alley. The downpour continued, hammering the ground, sending streams of water trickling down the drainage paths. The dim glow of the streetlights reflected off the puddles, casting an eerie, melancholic glow over the scene. Against the shadowed wall, a man sat slumped over, his body trembling from the cold. His head was slightly bowed, and his tattered military coat clung to his thin frame like a fragile barrier, powerless against the unforgiving weather. The rain had soaked through the worn-out fabric, dulling its olive-green hue until it looked almost gray, not just from water, but as if it had absorbed years of silent pain. Trump stood still for a moment, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. The faint stitches of an American flag that had once been proudly sewn onto the sleeve, now reduced to frayed threads. Beside the man lay a faded backpack, its zipper partially open, revealing a journal with ink smeared by the relentless rain. A little farther away, a weathered gun rested on the ground, its chamber empty, just like the hollow gaze of its owner. Without hesitation, Trump knelt down, unfazed by the raindrops pelting his shoulders. He slipped off his coat and gently draped it over the man's shaking body, shielding him, if only slightly, from the bitter cold. "What's your name?" Trump asked, his voice low but firm. The man stirred slightly. Slowly, he lifted his head. The dim streetlight revealed his face, once strong, resilient, now etched with deep lines of hardship, war, and unseen wounds. His eyes, sharp yet empty, held the weight of someone who had witnessed things no man should ever have to see. He stared at Trump for a long moment, as if trying to decipher the man before him. Was he just another passerby offering pity? A well-dressed philanthropist looking for a story to tell? Or was he someone who truly wanted to listen? Then, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, the man finally spoke. "I used to have a name." His voice was hoarse, rough, as if it had been too long since anyone had asked. "But no one remembers it anymore." Trump studied him, unblinking. He wasn't the kind of man to be easily discouraged. And in that simple sentence, he didn't just hear sorrow. He heard a challenge. A silent question. Do you really care? Do you actually want to know? Or is this just another fleeting moment of sympathy? Trump didn't break eye contact. He took a slow, steady breath and answered, his voice unwavering. "Tell me your story." For the first time, a flicker of something passed through the soldier's eyes. Not hope. Hope was something he had lost long ago. But maybe, just maybe, tonight will be different. The rain kept falling. The wind kept howling. But in that moment, between a powerful businessman and a forgotten soldier, a story was about to unfold. A story that perhaps was never meant to be buried. Part 3. The Journey Back, Secrets of the Past. The rain continued to fall, but it was no longer the heaviest thing hanging in the air between the two men. Trump held the gaze of the homeless soldier before him. Eyes that had once been sharp, once filled with determination, but now carried only the faded remnants of a painful past. After a long silence, the man finally spoke. "Nathan. Nathan Cole." His voice was hoarse, as if the name hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Trump frowned. The name wasn't unfamiliar. He had come across it before, buried in classified documents, linked to missions no one ever talked about in the press. But the strange thing was, that name had disappeared. Nathan Cole turned his head slightly, as if searching for scattered fragments of memory. Then, slowly, he began to speak. I was a Navy SEAL, but not just any SEAL unit. We were Bravo X, a team operating in the shadows, handling missions that the United States would never officially acknowledge. We went deep behind enemy lines, completing objectives no one else would dare take. No one knew who we were, but we didn't care. We fought for what we believed was right. He paused for a moment, a faint smirk appearing on his lips, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. And then, we were betrayed. His words weren't filled with rage, but there was something chilling in the way he said them. It happened too fast. We were given an assignment, a top-secret operation near the Afghanistan border. But when we arrived, it wasn't a raid. It was an ambush. Trump stood still, listening intently. The rain kept falling, but everything else seemed to fade away. Only Nathan's voice remained. When we tried calling for backup, all communications were cut. When we attempted to retreat, our exit routes were blocked. And the ones waiting for us weren't the enemy. They were the very people who were supposed to have our backs. They gave the order to eliminate us, like we had never existed. His hands clenched into fists, but there was no explosive anger, only the weight of unspeakable betrayal pressing down on every word. I did everything I could to survive, and somehow I made it back. But when I returned, I was no longer a soldier. I was no one. Every record of Bravo X was erased. My name vanished from the military database. No one would acknowledge my existence. I became a ghost. A gust of wind swept through the alley, as if the world itself shuddered at his words. I couldn't seek justice, because on paper, I had never existed. I couldn't file complaints, couldn't track down my team, couldn't tell the world that we had been betrayed. And over time, I lost everything: my honor, my family, my brothers in arms. I died the day they erased my name. He turned to Trump, his expression both hollow and defiant. So, there you have it. That's my story. And now, tell me, do you really want to hear it? Or are you just another person who will walk away the moment you realize I have nothing left to offer this world? Trump didn't respond immediately. He simply stood there, looking directly into the man's eyes. But there was no pity in his gaze, no hesitation. Only deep contemplation, a realization that this man wasn't just another homeless veteran. He was the key to a buried secret. And Trump knew, from this moment on, he couldn't ignore this story. Part 4. Trump's bold decision, bringing the truth to light. Trump stood still in the rain. Nathan's story wasn't just the tragedy of one man. It was a stain on the very honor of the United States. This wasn't just about a forgotten soldier. It was about an entire unit of elite warriors betrayed and buried beneath the dust of political schemes. He took a deep breath. He had witnessed many injustices in his life, but this was unacceptable. Come with me. Nathan narrowed his eyes, suspicion flickering across his face. Where? Trump didn't answer immediately. He met Nathan's gaze with unwavering determination. Somewhere safe. And from this moment on, you're no longer a ghost. Not long after, a black armored SUV pulled into the deserted alley. Trump and Nathan stepped inside, and as soon as the doors shut, the vehicle moved swiftly through the rain-slicked streets of New York, disappearing like a shadow into the night. Nathan stared out the window, watching the towering buildings of the city he had once fought to protect. He couldn't remember the last time he had sat inside a luxury vehicle. Life on the streets had taught him not to trust kindness too easily. But something in Trump's demeanor made him hesitate before considering an escape. An hour later, the SUV turned onto a secluded road, passing through a discreet security checkpoint. Nathan narrowed his eyes. This wasn't a hotel. It wasn't a government office. It was a hidden compound, tucked away in an old industrial zone. The doors opened, and Trump stepped out first. "Welcome," he said, "to the sanctuary of the forgotten." Nathan followed him inside. The moment he stepped in, he realized this was no ordinary place. The men in the room, former soldiers, special operatives, individuals who had once belonged to shadow units, all of them carried something familiar in their eyes. Loss, anger, and stories no one had ever believed. An older man with graying hair stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "You're Nathan Cole?" Nathan nodded, still wary. The man gave a small, knowing smile and clapped him on the shoulder. "You're not the only one who's been betrayed." Nathan glanced around the room, filled with men who had been erased from the system, stripped of their honor, left to fade into nothing. He wasn't alone anymore. Trump wasted no time. He immediately ordered an investigation into everything related to Bravo X. Advisors, attorneys, and military insiders began combing through whatever records they could find. But it wasn't easy. Pages had been blacked out. Key files had been wiped clean. The gaps in the system were too precise, too intentional. But Trump was not a man easily deterred. Weeks of relentless digging finally unearthed the truth. Classified documents from over a decade ago revealed that Bravo X had not just been an elite task force. They had been sent on a mission that was never supposed to exist. A covert operation to neutralize an armed faction with ties to a foreign government. But then, everything changed. The U.S. government shifted its position. The mission was deemed politically inconvenient. And to erase all traces of it, Bravo X had to be erased too. They hadn't just been betrayed. They had been sacrificed. Nathan read through the files, his fingers tightening around the pages until his knuckles turned white. He had always suspected the truth, but seeing it laid bare in front of him reignited a fury he had tried to bury for years. Trump placed a firm hand on Nathan's shoulder, his voice resolute. "We're not letting this stay buried." Trump was not a man of empty words. When he set his mind to something, he saw it through. He arranged meetings with high-ranking officials, demanding a formal investigation into Bravo X. He reached out to journalists unafraid to speak the truth, providing them with evidence of the betrayal that had cost good men their lives. Nathan was no longer a ghost. His name, his fallen brothers, and the ones who had been erased from history, they would be forgotten no longer. But what Trump didn't yet realize was that in digging up the past, he was disturbing forces that had no intention of letting the truth come to light. And that meant they were about to face a war of an entirely different kind. Part 5. The Showdown, Confronting the Shadows. Everything was set. That afternoon, in a dimly lit conference room, the glow of overhead lights reflected off the dark wooden walls. Recording equipment was in place, but there were no flashing cameras, no rows of eager reporters waiting for the next big scoop. This wasn't a typical press conference. This was the moment when truth would finally step out of the shadows. Trump took the stage. In front of him was a small, hand-picked group of independent journalists, not chosen for their loyalty to the government or the establishment, but for their unwavering pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. Beside him, Nathan Cole stood tall. A simple suit couldn't conceal the battle scars life had etched into his face. Behind them, the other men, former soldiers of Bravo X, along with others who had been cast aside by the system, stood in silent formation. For the first time in years, they were no longer ghosts. Trump gripped the folder in front of him, scanning the room before he spoke. His voice was steady, firm. "There are things that were meant to stay buried forever. But I don't believe in secrets built on the blood of those who fought for this country." All eyes locked onto him. Today, we are not just talking about one man. We're talking about hundreds, thousands who were betrayed by the very system they dedicated their lives to defending. He lifted the folder, once a classified document, its pages once redacted, but now its hidden truths laid bare. This is the record of Bravo X, a special operations unit that carried out missions the government wanted erased from history. These men fought with extraordinary courage, yet instead of being honored, they were betrayed, erased from military records, and cast into the shadows as if they had never existed. Behind him, the screen lit up. Photographs of Bravo X in combat flashed across the display. Declassified reports, evidence of the political cover-up that had condemned them to oblivion. Nathan's hands clenched into fists, his chest tightening. This was the moment he had dreamed of for years, when the truth would be spoken, when the forgotten would finally be seen, when justice would begin to find its way back. The other veterans stepped forward. They weren't just there as silent witnesses. They began to speak. One by one, their voices cut through the heavy air. Each man told his story. One spoke of how he was hunted after refusing to participate in a government-ordered cover-up. Another described losing his family after being branded a traitor, when, in reality, he was the one who had been betrayed. The room buzzed with tension. The journalists scribbled furiously, cameras rolling as the testimonies unfolded. The video feed spread rapidly across social media. The story had escaped the confines of the room, and now no one could stop it. The warning. Then, just as the energy in the room reached its peak, a sharp ping echoed from one of Trump's aides' phones. A message. No sender. No traceable origin. Only a single, chilling sentence. Stop now while you still can. The shadows had awakened. The hidden forces move. Less than an hour after the press conference, a chain of unusual events began to unfold. Major news networks refused to air the footage of Bravo X. Reporters who had attended the conference received ominous warnings, hints that their careers might not survive if they pursued the story any further. Social media platforms quickly began censoring related posts. Mentions of Bravo X mysteriously vanished. Then came the phone calls. Trump picked up one of them. On the other end, a voice, calm, measured, but laced with unmistakable threat. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Trump. You have a lot to lose. A long pause. Then Trump replied, I know exactly what I'm getting into. His voice was unwavering. And I don't back down. He hung up. His eyes burned with determination. If they thought they could silence him with threats, they had made a grave mistake. If they wanted to bury the truth, they would have to face something they feared even more. Justice. Truth. And a man who refused to be silenced. The story of Bravo X had been buried for too long, and now it had returned. This time, nothing would stop it. Final chapter, a new beginning for the forgotten. The first rays of morning sunlight stretched across a crowded square. Thousands had gathered, the American flag waving gently in the cool breeze. Today was not an ordinary day. Today was the day America righted a decade-old wrong. Nathan Cole stood backstage, his fingers gripping the velvet box containing a Medal of Honor. It all still felt surreal. A year ago, he had been a ghost, wandering the dark alleys of New York, a forgotten man, a living witness to betrayal. But today, he stood here not as someone discarded, but as a representative for thousands of veterans who had been denied recognition. He adjusted his tie, his eyes scanning the sea of people. Veterans from all over had come. Men and women whose heads had once hung low under the weight of their pasts, now standing tall with pride. In the front row, Nathan spotted his former comrades, those who had been buried in the shadows alongside him. They were no longer ghosts. At the center of that front row, Donald Trump sat in silence, watching Nathan. Their eyes met, and Trump gave him a small nod. No words were needed. A simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of a promise fulfilled. After the explosive press conference, public outrage had erupted. The government could no longer stay silent against the overwhelming demand for justice. An investigative committee was formed, exposing the truth about Bravo X. Names of those who had orchestrated the cover-up were dragged into the light. Some of the most powerful figures in the political and military spheres fell. Justice had been served. But for Nathan, the real victory wasn't just in holding the guilty accountable. It was in creating a future for the veterans who had been abandoned. With Trump's support, Nathan founded the Bravo X Foundation, a network dedicated to helping forgotten veterans rebuild their lives. They didn't just provide housing, jobs, and medical care. They helped these warriors find purpose again. At the same time, Trump officially launched the Bravo X Initiative, a program committed to uncovering and restoring the honor of units that had been erased from history. The past couldn't be changed, but the truth could finally be written, the way it was meant to be. The walls of silence had been shattered. 1 year later, a defining moment. The loudspeakers echoed across the square, pulling Nathan back to the present. The announcer stepped onto the podium. And now, please welcome Nathan Cole, representing Bravo X. Thunderous applause erupted. Nathan took a deep breath and stepped forward. The bright stage lights illuminated his path, but this time he didn't feel lost or forgotten. He approached the podium, glancing at the Medal of Honor placed before him. But to him, this wasn't just an award. It was a symbol of those who had been left behind for too long. Nathan picked up the microphone, his voice steady but thick with emotion. I once believed my final battle ended on the battlefield, but I was wrong. The real fight began the day I returned home and realized I had been erased. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the thousands before him. But I'm not a ghost anymore, and I stand here today not just for myself, but for every man and woman who has fought for this country and deserves to be remembered. The crowd erupted in applause, louder than before. Nathan bowed his head as the medal was placed around his neck. Then, turning to the audience, his eyes found Trump sitting quietly among them. Nathan gave a small nod, a silent thank you to the man who had believed in him when no one else did. Trump said nothing. He simply smiled, as if everything had unfolded exactly as it should have. The stage lights shone brightly on Nathan's face. But this time, he was no longer standing in the shadows. He had found himself again, and his story, the story of Bravo X, would never be forgotten.